Hello and welcome to this panel discussion today, The Fight for Education in Africa. I am Sedem Amma, a professional boxer and PR account lead, and my co-host is another professional boxer, a future world champion and full-time smooth talker, Isaac Chamberlain. So Isaac, what does education mean to you?
Thanks, Sedem. Really pleased to be here today discussing such an important topic. Education to me means having a fair advantage at the start. You know, not many people are given a fair advantage in terms of receiving education. And I definitely believe in having an even playing field to birth future doctors, future lawyers, anything that these kids want to be in the future, they can definitely do it with the right education. And that's just the key to anything that you want to do.
Great response.
What does girls having the right to education mean for you, and why is it so important?
Well, as a woman myself, I know how challenging it can be to, compete, not in just the workplace, but in life overall. So I suppose by having an education, it helps to level out the playing field. We have a long way to go, obviously, but discussions like this are really important for raising awareness. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks to everybody for joining. So let's get started.
Yes. Today, we're joined by our panelists, Debbie Mavis, HR Director at Avanti Communications, Richard Marriott, co-founder of CEO of Wiz Education, David Hollow, CEO at Jigsaw Consult, Dr. Sylvester Mulambe, Director of Policy, Partnership and East Africa Community Affairs, and Joyce Kimiata, a gender expert based in Kenya. Sedem and I have a few questions we would like to ask to chat to this panel about. While we're talking, do feel free to send questions through our chat, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end.
Thank you, Isaac. So, I mean, what a fantastic panel. I'm really excited to get started. So Debbie, I'll start with you first, if you don't mind. Through your leadership of Avanti's I Milango program, what are the unique challenges faced by children in lower income countries?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Sedem, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. So education is often sort of weighing a long list of challenges that families in low-income countries face on a day-to-day basis. So earning enough money to feed the family in a day is usually their top priority, followed by things like health and purchasing of medicines and security. I mean, the keeping the family safe is absolutely up there as well. So education can quite often come on the end of that list. But if we focus on their education specifically, access to education is so far and few. I mean, the technology and electricity and water, having access to technology is not often there. The children that are fortunate enough to go to school, if we can say that, the fortunate ones that get to school, they're often in huge class sizes, very large class sizes, with very limited resources, some school books, etc., that are out of date and quite low quality at times. So the experience of a child in school is often dependent on the teacher themselves. And the teachers in Kenya, the ones that we've got examples of, are fabulous. They're amazing people, committed and dedicated, but they don't have a lot of the technology and the ICT training that often teachers have in more, in countries that are not low income. So on an ongoing basis, their sort of access to resources is minimal. So when you're able to bridge that divide and get the children sort of access to technology, it just brings us on, and we'll talk on later around the improvement that we can bring through technology.
That's really interesting, and I've certainly experienced some of these challenges myself. However, I think a girl in a low-income country might experience very different challenges. So Joyce, as a leading gender expert in Kenya, what are some of those gender barriers for girls in education in sub-Saharan Africa?
You're on mute, Joyce.
Is she on mute?
Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. I agree with you that children in sub-Saharan Africa face many challenges, which actually become gender barriers. But in addition, girls have numerous gender barriers to education as compared to boys. I happen to have engagements with the community, with the teachers on the ground, especially in 4 counties in this country, where we went through practical identification of these gender barriers with the communities, with the teachers. And it is amazing how they can identify these gender barriers so easily, but they have no idea how these gender barriers interfere with education. For example, from the community, we have the early marriages, we have discrimination by gender when it comes to access to education. We have low expectation of girls' education by the parents. We also have socialization where girls are socialized to be shy as a virtue of a good woman for a good wife in future, which means when they come to class, they are so shy and they don't participate actively. We also have the ignorance on benefits of education from the community, so they don't really see the need to support education, even with the meager resources that are there. We also have the negative cultural practices, especially in some communities at the coast in the Rift Valley, where they have night dances where girls are exposed to the night and they get into sexual activities very early, which results in pregnancies. But unfortunately, this permits to the school the gender barriers, especially when we look at the teaching methods, gender biased pedagogy, where teachers use methods of teaching in the environment which are not gender responsive. For instance, we have a gender bias in the distribution of teaching materials, teaching or learning materials. And when it comes to technology, my experience, especially in the schools in the Imrango project, where girls and boys do not access the computers equally. The boys would rush to the lab and then girls would be left behind, which means by the time girls get to the lab, then they find the boys have occupied all the working computers and then girls are left to share the very few. We also have discrimination in terms of the language, demeaning language used by the teacher, gender, against gender. We also have low expectation of girls by the teachers when it comes to science subjects and mathematics, and also the negative attitude by girls and women teachers when it comes to technology. Remember, technology in Africa is viewed as a men's area. So when you go to those schools, you find it's only 1 or 2 men teachers who are interested in the technology, and then the girls sit back when they are using technology to have the boys lead them, and sometimes they are so docile in those classes. We also have physical facilities in the schools. It is so pathetic, Isaac, when you get to some schools where the desks are not very gender responsive, especially to the girls, when they have to lift their legs to get into the desk, and yet they're having their menses, they don't have underpants, they don't have sanitary pants, especially during menses, they have no changing rooms, the washrooms are pathetic, yes. So we have very many gender barriers in school, which are school-based, which is actually very unfortunate because the school is supposed to be the one really dealing with these gender barriers to create parity in access to education for both boys and girls. Yes.
I think it's a mindset thing then. You got to change the mindset of the teachers, you know, because they're not having confidence in the females. And I think the confidence is supposed to come from the teachers, giving confidence into the young students to make them believe in their dreams. But if the teachers ain't doing it, that's making me think, like, where do you even start? Like, you know, that's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, you raised so many points there, even just, you know, in terms of the women sitting on the stools. You know, when I went to an all-girls secondary school, and that wasn't something that we even considered, because obviously we didn't have to necessarily worry about the boys being around if we are going through our menses. So yeah, you've raised so many points there, just a lot of food for thought. So thank you for that response. So Dr. Malambe, hello. In your role at the Ministry of Education, you will have vast knowledge of girls' education. So what is the Ministry of Education doing in regards to girls' mentorship?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to say that we from the Ministry of Education have been very much conscious about girls' education. We have put in a lot of strategies to ensure that we have what we call gender parity with regard to provision of education, both access, quality, and all that. But of course, at some point, we also did realize one other barrier that needed a program that we call mentorship. And we felt that a number of girls, just like my colleague from gender has reiterated, pass through a lot of challenges, and they actually need to be mentored so that they can be able to realize their full potential. In a number of cases, we did realize that there were so many other people or actors having realized that there was room to do mentorship, who are actually quacks also, people who are not trained as such to do mentorship, were also masquerading as mentors. And we felt that the area of mentorship needed to be regulated, and a framework for mentorship for our girls and of course all our students needed to be put in place. And I think in the year 2019, we came up with a mentorship policy for basic learning institutions, which now guided the whole process of mentorship, trying to regulate mentors, vetting mentors, and ensuring that the people who actually get to our girls to mentor them are people who have the relevant skills, the relevant capacity, and that we are able to also measure the impact of their work. In addition to this, still in the line of mentorship, we did realize also the importance of guidance and counseling. And of course, both in our session of paper number 1 of 2019, and also in our sector and strategy of 2018 to 2022, we have actually emphasized the need for guidance and counseling programs. And we have even crowned it up by saying that we need a guidance and counseling policy to look into the area of psychosocial support to the girls and of course to all the students. And in that respect, we are already working on a guidance and counseling policy to guide teachers who are engaging with the girls and of course all the learners in the area of guidance and counseling. We also did realize that for these girls to realize their potential, they also need to be guided in the area of career guidance. And we already, through our sister state department of post-training and skill development, we are working on a career guidance and counseling policy to actually come up with a whole set of careers and what they mean to the lives of these people, to help career guiders to guide the learners so that they can be able to make correct choices as they move forward through their education. Through partners, through partners like ActionAid, through partners like VSO and many others, we have what we call catch-up programs. I want to tell you these programs are doing wonders. We just realized somewhere in between that we have also girls who surely didn't step into any school. They are also available. They are also there somehow within the deeper parts of the country. We have girls who didn't step into any school and they have grown into age 14, 15 and thereabout, and they needed to be helped. So working with these organizations, we have come up with a catch-up program where these girls are taught literacy and numeracy skills, and then thereafter they get into pathways. One of them is back to school, where we can now see where they can fit. The other one is TVET. The other one is entrepreneurship, so that they can be taught maybe some business or some apprenticeship, so that they can be able to better their lives. I think this is quite key in ensuring that we leave no one behind as per SDG 4. We also did realize that several learners, particularly our girls, have problems once they are out of school and they want to get back to school. We have developed what we call re-entry guidelines to guide teachers and head teachers on how to have girls and of course all the learners back to school once they drop out because of various reasons. And this one of course is helping us quite a lot to ensure that all girls who have had a problem in one way or the other get back to school. Of course, we have other programs that have been running to help the girls, sanitary towels program, mobile schools. But what is key, which my colleague really alluded to, is STEM mentorship. STEM mentorship program. We did realize that it looks like most of our girls surely have left the STEM-related subject, the technology-related subjects, as a preserve for their male counterparts. And we have come up with a STEM mentorship program where we actually visit counties, and girls are brought to a center, and they are talked to by role models who have succeeded in the area of STEM, in the area of technology. And I think this one is doing quite a lot of good for us. Mlango, which my colleague did talk about also, has done a lot, particularly in the area of technology, trying to ensure that there is the issue of connectivity, the content, attendance, and of course, is it the hardware and all that is all done. I think maybe we can leave it there as we have the discussion going. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You touched on a lot of different points there, so that was very comprehensive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Richard, is Richard there? Richard?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hey, Richard, how are you doing?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Wiz Education, they've been involved in numerous education projects. From this experience, how do you think we can dramatically ramp up the quality, access, and equity to learning across Africa?
Well, Isaac, that's a pretty big question. So in my 3 minutes, let me just share with you some of the experiences we've had, and also the opportunity that I think we're about to enter in given the post-COVID world, given the appetite of stakeholders in education to consider new and developing ways to address not only access, but actually the really incredibly important element of quality of learning. And then how do we span that across nations so that we have equity? And I think we're going to see a lot of progress there. Already there has been in many African countries for some time investment in access to infrastructure, a growing connectivity. There's still a long way to go, and there is a real possibility now that, and I think stakeholders need to work together to knowledge share, to consider how to exploit that access to not just schooling, but also connectivity, some of the infrastructure that's being put in schools. And so far, there have been pockets and things that have been done at various places in Africa and around the world that really shine a light to how we might take things forward as an ecosystem. And so let me give you some examples. We're seeing a lot of those sort of internet access to devices being used for learning content, but actually we're also seeing examples where it's being taken further from that. Because if you think about content, when teachers write up on a board, that is content of a form. But we're now seeing the exploitation of adaptive learning technologies that really can cater to each individual child's learning needs and really support teachers to help every child, even when they've got very large class sizes. We can use the data that's coming out of that, the learning data, to help us understand how can we support an individual child, a group of children, a school, a community, and even at a country level. So there is a little bit of development and maturity of the ecosystem to fully exploit that, but I think that's a journey we're about to undertake, and how to use that to actually help teachers, because teachers are still on a journey. We still have an issue of supporting subject matter expertise for teachers, instructional practices, and how do you deploy these education technologies effectively? And how can ministries create the enabling environment and the supporting environment to fully deploy and exploit those capabilities? But the opportunity is tremendous. We must think about learning outcomes. We must think about quality of learning and how to address that equity gap. And I think what we have available to us now, and the need post-COVID, is the will to really understand the capabilities that have been trialed, that have been used at some scale, to actually make a huge difference in the immediate future and for the years to come. So I think we'll see a lot. Actually, just to add to that, Isaac, the World Bank is coming up with a series of guides and podcasts to support their government clients around, for example, the opportunities around using adaptive learning technologies to support individual students, how to deploy continuous learning data to help inform policy and actions that will improve learning at a much more rapid rate than we've been able to do in the past. And Kenya's been a really good example with some of those at-scale pilots have been conducted. Imalanga, that Debbie mentioned earlier, deployed digital content, but it also deployed adaptive learning in maths with some really exciting improvements in learning outcomes. And so I think we'll be exploiting the knowledge gained out of those at-scale projects to help in a much broader way going forward. And that actually, Isaac, that also speaks to the gender parity as well, because these capabilities are agnostic with regard to gender. And so actually one of the things we've seen is how girls have benefited from that in an almost disproportionate way.
That's amazing, man.
So I want you to visualize there is a real opportunity now in 2021, that over the next 5 to 10 years, and really starting now, where students will have access through an online capability to a system that tailors to their specific needs, where they're at their particular moment in their learning journey. And that's foundational learning. And that foundational learning in maths, in literacy, is critical to some of the things that Dr. Malambi just spoke about. How can we encourage, girls to engage in STEM more than they are currently? How can we set them up so that they have career options, and career development is something that they can really take forward? And so I think one of the great opportunities for some of these capabilities that are coming is actually in the early stages of schooling, in primary, middle school, and as we enter secondary as well.
Wow.
Thank you, Richard. It sounds like, the saying Rome wasn't built in a day definitely sounds true to this, because at least we're taking the right steps to go into the, positive direction. It will take time, but we're all, working together to try and achieve that.
That's really happening. And I'm seeing more and more stakeholders acquiring distinctions and the lessons that, frankly, many governments have invested over the last 10 years, and many private stakeholders, the private sector, NGOs. There's so much learning that's been accumulated. And now I think post-COVID, we've got the will to really go extract those learnings and do something really impactful with it.
Thank you. So David, through your work at Jigsaw, you have broad experience, of course, in a wide range of education projects across sub-Saharan Africa, as well as other lower income countries. So I suppose, what for you is key to education and learning outcomes going forward?
Sure, thanks Sedem. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've already learned a huge amount from the conversation that we've had so far. So let me try and respond to that by drawing on what a couple of people have said. So all the work that I do and the team that I'm part of does is about building evidence in education. It's about taking good ideas, what we've heard about already from Dr. Malambi, from Joyce and others, and helping them to grow. Evidence doesn't always sound like a particularly exciting word. It can be a bit boring, but really it's about being serious about how we take good ideas for changing education and say, let's understand what works, why, in what context, and how can we scale that in a sustainable way to have a really big impact on learning. So like Isaac said right at the beginning, it's education that provides the foundation on which children can build and flourish in life. And we've already heard about a range of the challenges, and especially for girls, being overcome. I just thought it'd be worth us stepping back for a minute and thinking about the big picture, the nature of the challenge, and then looking at some of the opportunities. As Debbie said at the beginning, there's a really big challenge around simply accessing school. Of all the regions in the world, it's sub-Saharan Africa that has the highest rates of children who never even get to attend school. So for children age around 6 to 11 in primary school, you've got more than 1 in 5 children will never enter school at all. And then by the time you get to the latter stages of secondary school, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, nearly 2/3 will be out of school completely. So you've got a big challenge around access that we face, but then even more importantly than that, we have a quality challenge. So even the children that do get to go to school, by the time children are 10, we estimate that 9 out of 10 will still not be able to read with the comprehension that they need for life. So getting children into school, as many people on this call are very well aware, is not sufficient. Once they're in school, there's still a massive challenge about helping people to learn to read, learn to write, and gain the foundational skills that they need. So there's a crisis in quality and a crisis in access. And we've already heard from the example of Dr. Malambe in Kenya, some of the very effective initiatives that the government is leading on there, specifically with girls' education and in other aspects as well. So what I wanted to do was just think a little bit about the role of technology. Everyone is thinking about the role of technology in education at the moment this year. We've all had to adapt in different ways in high-income countries and low-income countries, and it's been a challenge for everybody. But we're talking about education here in some of the most marginalized places. So we know that the use of tech in education will continue to grow, but that's not necessarily going to be positive. It might be positive, it might be negative, probably both in different places. And that's why we want to focus on evidence. We don't just achieve impact on education by putting laptops or tablets into schools. That doesn't work. It doesn't really lead to a change in learning. We need a more integrated approach. Like Richard said, things like use of tech for helping data-driven decision-making, tech for personalized and adaptive learning, using tech to help teachers learn better in carrying on with their professional development when they're in the midst of their work. So ultimately, it comes down to thinking with a range of options that a government has, that a donor has, that a charity has. How do you spend the money available to have the biggest impact on learning outcomes for the most children and help them to flourish? So that takes us into things that are a bit technical, like cost per beneficiary and value for money, and the need for alignment with government priorities, national curriculum. So we want to be critical but optimistic about the future. And if there's one thing we need for increasing learning outcomes, it's a culture change, a change in how decisions are made at all levels of education, so that the investments that get made are made on the evidence of what works and what is going to have most long-term transformative impact on helping children get into school and then helping them learn the foundational skills that they need once they're there.
Yeah, you're very right. It's not just supplying the stuff that you need to get them into school. It's actually, personally, I think, having the teachers develop a connection with the students to enable them to engage in their activities a lot better. Because anyone can just, I wouldn't say anyone, but everyone has different ways of learning. Everyone has very, very different. All these kids, every child is different. So I'm definitely thinking you're definitely right in what you're saying. You're definitely.
And Isaac, just to build on that as well, I was thinking, over COVID, we've seen a lot of kids having to adapt to learning at home. They're given their iPads to learn at home, but then they also need the support from their families to teach them as well. So it's not just go to school and learn in school. It's also about what happens when they leave school. How are they retaining that information? It all kind of just comes full circle,
100%.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've spoken about technology and how technology can enable growth in learning outcomes, obviously. I mean, my family are Ghanaian and I went home often. I say home because I went so often that it feels like I'm still there a lot of the time. And you know, I was always around my cousins and other family members, and they would tell me about the technology and how it enabled their learning. So this conversation is really, it applies everywhere. So Joyce, in your opinion, what are some of the strategies to minimize the gender barriers you spoke of earlier in order to enhance equal opportunity to quality education for both girls and boys in marginalized regions in Kenya?
Okay, thank you, Sedem, and I'm happy because the previous speakers have touched on this. Dr. Sylvester has really touched on one of the strategies, which is to do with the learners. And when I'm looking at the strategies, I look at what is it that will enable the children, especially the girls, to stay in school. That is one, and then access quality education. So I'm looking at the strategies in twofold. I'm looking at the strategies at the level of support from the community. Because if the community does not support children, then they obviously drop out. As much as we have the use of technology in our schools, if the girls do not stay in school, then we are losing. So I'm looking at initiatives that can engage the community, and I have a very good case study in Emrango project where I was involved in community engagement in support of girls' education, in support of the education for both boys and girls, but particularly for girls. Now, when I was interacting with the communities and we were looking at the strategies, and we came up both in a participatory method, they used to discuss in groups, and they would all come up with strategies to minimize these gender barriers. And I would go for those strategies because they're the strategies that would work most because of sustainability. One of the strategies is that we need a project that is using embracing a whole school approach. That means strengthening the partnership in education between the parents, the teachers, the school admin, the education office, the Ministry of Education at the headquarters. If we can have a project which embraces whole school, so that all of us, all the stakeholders in education are speaking the same language, and especially looking at quality education, looking at removing some of these barriers to education. So sensitization of the community, especially on the benefits of education, because I discovered in most of the communities, they have been expecting education should give very short-term benefits. Like a child will go to school and after 3 or 2 years, they will bring back some income. And then they are frustrated when they see children are staying in school for 10 years and they are only spending on the children. But when I interacted with the community in the Imrango project, communities in Kilifi, County of Kenya, communities in Kajiado, the nomadic communities, it was so amazing that they could now visualize the long-term benefits of education. So I think that is one of the strategies that needs to be used to minimize the barriers. Once the parents realize the benefits of education, especially for girls, they are going to minimize all these other barriers that are there for the girls. I'm now looking at the school and I'm looking at the teachers and the pedagogy. If you look at some of the teachers when they are teaching and they are using demeaning language to girls, and girls are dropping out. Girls are not being supported during menses. I remember in Kenya in 2019, we had one girl who committed suicide because her teacher just ridiculed her for soiling her dress during her menstrual periods. She actually committed suicide in the evening after school. So this support, I think teachers need to be trained on gender responsive pedagogy. That is one, so that they can give equal opportunity to both boys and girls in the learning environment so that they can all drive their potential. And I'm looking also at the training which should incorporate a very friendly training to teachers on how to use technology as a tool to assisting them to enhance their teaching and learning. If the teachers see it that way, and I have a case study one time when we were with staff in the field, and we combined effort, gender and the technology, the WIS maths, and the WIS officer introduced the teachers to technology as a tool of enabling them to make the learners learn the concept easier. It was so interesting, and I wish every teacher would have that kind of experience where they are looking at the technology just as the chat, just as the reality they use in class, and I think that would be very effective. I agree with Richard and David, because technology has meant a change. Actually, iMrango is a game changer in the project in terms of girls' education, because girls can catch up even when they don't have time to follow what the teacher is saying. They can catch up. And also WIS played a very big role when it came to the COVID season, where the children now are able to use technology. But because of gender issues, some families did not support the learners, in terms of technology, because technology belongs to men, and so many children who are from single parents, the mother is there, it's like, technology belongs to males. I'm also looking at the school environment, which is actually a very big factor, because even if we have beautiful, wonderful labs, and then the girls are not supported to stay in school. For example, if we look at when girls have their menses, when do they change? During break time. They can't change. Most of the girls that I've interacted with, they say that they would rather get pregnant so that they can have an opportunity of getting out of school, because school is a torture. 5 days every month, the girls go through a lot of trauma. They have nowhere to change. They have no support. The desks are so unfriendly, especially when the girls are having menses. Most of the desks in our schools, they have this high bar at the side, and the girls have to get in to the desk, and they don't have any undergarments. They're having their menses. Many may not have pants. Maybe some schools have pants, but schools do not provide underpants. So when a girl is using a pant and there's no underpants, how do they hold that pant throughout the day? So when girls are tired, especially those who are maturing earlier in standard 4, by the time they get to standard 5 to standard 6, they are so tired, they feel so tortured. And some of them that I interviewed in some of the regions here, they said they would rather look for somebody to make them pregnant so that they can get out of school with a reason. Because education is compulsory in Kenya, so they cannot just stay at home. They are going to be arrested. So I think it's a whole complex of a situation. So I'm thinking of a sensitization or a training for the school and the mean, which is the head teacher and the board of management, on how to create a gender responsive school. So I'm just looking at the 3 main strategies. I'm looking at the strategy of the community engagement. I'm looking at the strategy of training teachers on gender responsive.
Yeah, I think that's the most important one. The teachers, yes. The teachers need to understand straight away.
Yes.
Because that's unbelievable what you just told me.
I agree, Isaac.
The teachers, that's where it starts. It all starts from the teachers. The teachers are supposed to make the students feel comfortable enough to come into school. Yes. To make them know that school is a good thing to come to and learn, but they're trying to make it hard as possible.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
Yes. But Isaac, kindly allow me, so that I can connect the curriculum with technology. Because I've realized in my observations that most teachers do not connect syllabus interpretation and technology. So they may take children to the lab, and when they take children to the lab, they are learning actually something very different from the curriculum follow-up, which is in play. So we need a training for teachers where they can be able to interpret the curriculum effectively and implement it effectively while incorporating technology, so that at least we can have quality education, because that is where quality is, where we have a gap with the quality. Technology and quality, they don't know how to incorporate it in the curriculum interpretation.
Because what I'm thinking is, the teachers, like, they're obviously adults. They have daughters and sons. Why don't they teach why don't they teach the students in schools as if they're their own daughters and sons? That's what I'm not understanding. They're treating them as if they're wild animals. And that's the cause of suicide. The young child committing suicide because they got embarrassed. That's unacceptable.
Sure.
That's, oh man.
Isaac, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
A little bit at this on the data. One of the things, and there's also a question in the chat from Imrana about specific examples of adaptive learning that are likely to promote quality and learning outcomes, if I may also respond to that.
Okay.
But what we did see in frankly, almost all the programs we've been working with, and IMELANGO that Deb mentioned earlier applies, we often found that teachers really lack confidence and were fearful themselves. They're tasked with handling classes of often up to 100, if not more. I was in a class with 111 pupils on one occasion. These are remote, quite often resource-starved environments. The training the teachers have had, I'm not talking about just using technology, I'm talking about subject matter expertise. So if they're wanting to teach their class maths, quite often they didn't have the maths knowledge themselves. Mm-hmm. And so that fear of embarrassment, that fear of how to handle the class manifests itself in many different ways. And I'm sure teachers sometimes found themselves doing things that they wouldn't be proud of. But
so fear of being embarrassed, you go and embarrass a young child. Come on, bro.
I'm not sort of condoning that, but human behavior,
yeah, I understand,
when it's in fear, doesn't always apply in a logical way. And I think I think what Joyce mentioned is really, really important. That what we notice, even when we were using providing technology access, providing a learning opportunity, there were so many barriers that prevented that opportunity from being utilized, many of which Joyce has just mentioned. So we actually made a lot of progress as a program in IMELANGO in the latter stages, as we really confronted these issues and started to do more community engagement, started to really address teachers, not in how to deploy technology, but subject matter expertise, gender sensitization, instructional practices. And we started seeing learning really improve. And actually the whole process, Isaac, was very humbling. If I can actually now refer to the question Imran has asked, let me give you some very specific responses, Imrana, from IMELANGO. So we were working in, gosh, I think nearly 200 or about 200 fairly rural communities in 4 counties in Kenya, in Kilifi, in Makueni, in Uasin Gishu, and I'm trying to remember which was the 4th one. Anyway, that's not the essential point here. The point was that you had very large class sizes, teachers that weren't perhaps fully supported to deliver quality learning. And what we found, just from the data that we were getting as we were supporting students with these adaptive learning capabilities, was first of all that students were entering grade 1 and they were already 2 years behind international standards before they even started. And then for every year of schooling, we found that they dropped nearly a further half a year behind international standards. So frankly, by the time they were in year 6, they were quite a long way behind. They were 4 or 5 years behind international standards. So their counterparts, you know, in good private schools, in more privileged environments, were getting ready for, you know, high stakes KCP exam results and where they're going to go.
They were already ahead.
They already had, these students were really, where were they going to go? And then when you combine that with some of the social issues Joyce has mentioned, you saw a lot of dropout. So just when we started using those learning capabilities of supporting the student-centered learning, we saw an immediate improvement in learning rates. But actually, Imrana, they weren't that effective. There was some improvement, but not enough to make the difference of, you know, changing their future. But this was where there was a great example of, because we were focused on student-centered learning, using the internet, using these kind of technologies, we were accumulating a lot of learning data about where those children were at any given moment in time. So that data set was growing every second. And we were able to identify how we could adapt the way we supported the ecosystem, the way we supported those students We didn't find a single magic bullet, but over a 2 or 3 year period, we were able to more than double learning progress rates, in fact, nearly triple. So students who are getting access to those learning capabilities, combined with the teacher training and support that was happening in class, we were finding in a year of schooling, students were now actually progressing nearly a year and a half in their learning. In short, we were starting to narrow that, that learning divide, if you like. I still wouldn't call it, Imrana, just to be clear, I still wouldn't call it a totally successful program, because only a subset of the pupils were able to get the learning access of around, frankly, it was only 45 to 60 minutes a week of individualized learning. And the reason they weren't all getting access were because of a myriad of barriers. Joyce has mentioned just a subset of those barriers. And in the last year or two, just as unfortunately, COVID was a major disruptor of this, we were starting as a consortium of parties that brought different expertise to really start addressing those barriers. And I think there's more work to be done to complete that journey. And with that, I think we would have, I wouldn't want to call it a blueprint, but a set of insights that would help us apply such capabilities in more contexts and at greater scale. So, Rana, that answers
you, Richard.
Question, but I think it also complements what Joyce was saying.
I was going to say,
Richard, that's why it's so important to have that data as well, because then we can draw these insights. Debbie, I think you had a question.
I did actually. I was going to. Richard touched on some of that, but I think what we've heard today, and I think it's important to say this now, is, you know, we're facing into thousands and thousands of years of culture, and you can't change that overnight. So the program with the Imalango program, I think we learned very, very early days that you can't just deliver technology and then even just the learning content that Richard's talked a lot about with maths and with literature, etc. Just delivering that, you fail. And we learned that very early in the program. So bringing people on board in this whole program, bringing to be successful, is bringing people on board like Joyce. I mean, I've spent hours learning from Joyce. She's an amazing person, understanding the gender side of things, but Joyce helps us to share, to educate parents and how to treat girls the same as boys. She's helped us to educate teachers and beyond. And by doing that, you know, it certainly helps. You have to move all the barriers, not just bringing the technology. You have to be able to, you know, help the safeguarding, getting children to and from school, etc. Because unless you look at all of this wraparound service that you can deliver, education on its own, or the technology on its own, doesn't deliver. I know I'm conscious we've all talked an awful lot, so we're keeping you carry on, Sedem.
No problem. Isaac, over to you.
Is David there? I wanted to get something. I wanted to remember something. Oh, David, as you mentioned earlier, yeah, the value for money in these types of projects is important. Can you talk to me or us about the key understanding we must have to achieve both value for money and learning impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Isaac. And I'll keep it brief because I'm particularly interested to hear what Dr. Molambe, his experience on this as well. But I think a couple of points is to note, value for money is about figuring out what's going to have biggest impact for the most students in different contexts. Sometimes that's quite easy to figure out. Sometimes it's difficult. Isaac, you already talked about how important it is that we have well-trained, motivated teachers. And for that to be the case, we need to ensure they're properly paid and they have good training opportunities available to them. That obviously costs money, but it's a very sensible investment.
Yeah.
So we also know that if you want a child to learn to read, one of the most important things is not what happens in the school at all. The key determining factor whether a child learns to read or not is whether their parents read to them at home.
Absolutely.
But if your parents can't read, like 250 million adults in the world can't do, and you've got no books in your house, then you miss out. So someone who's already marginalized right from the beginning is going to continue to struggle. And then it's almost impossible to catch up unless there's another thing available to them. So the point is that education budgets are limited. everyone involved in setting budgets know there's trade-offs. Do we invest in this or do we invest in that? How can we have the biggest impact on education with the limited resources available? How can we make those decisions well? That's for an education ministry or a donor or a charity. So one of the things that we work on is a global initiative called the EdTech Hub. It's funded by the FCDO and the World Bank and the Gates Foundation, and it's a global initiative to build evidence in the use of technology in education. It's generating and curating evidence to say, okay, so how can technology be used most effectively to help improve learning? And we do a lot of work in Kenya with that. So it's about making a change in culture and priorities so that value for money is centralized. And one thing that some people engaging in this session might be interested in is the World Bank's work on LAYS, which is learning adjusted years of schooling. It's a measure to show how much children actually learn for the years they're in school. And then you can use that to figure out, okay, if we did this, how much would we change learning? Or if we did that, how much could we change learning? To build that kind of consistent comparison between different options. So I'll leave it there. I think we need critical caution. Systems of education are complicated and not everything can be pinned down to how much something costs. But I want to have a culture change where we actually build decisions on evidence, and good value for money is a big part of that.
Thank you, David. So Richard, what is a healthy role of connectivity, digital infrastructure, and education technologies in this?
I think we've spoken to that to some extent already in this session, and I think maybe I'll use this opportunity to follow up. I think there's a real possibility there's a lot of investment that's gone into connectivity infrastructure and those sort of things, and those are enablers. And I think pressing on what David has said is that as we build evidence as to what actually works, what will make a difference, we'll be smarter as a sort of ecosystem to apply those investments in such a way that we get a learning yield out of them. And I think those that are related to technology, if we can identify those that, and which we can, if we collectively identify those that are making an impact, I think what we've found already is that as you go to scale, technology has another enabler. Not only does it increase access, it potentially increases the economies of scale. As you go to scale, basically the value for money is not a fixed thing. As the ecosystem gets more, builds capacity to deploy them effectively, as they're rolled out at a greater scale, and ultimately a national scale at some point, you get tremendous economies of scale. I mean, for example, just to give you an example of some of our work, when we're working across, say, 100 schools, you know, the cost of making a real learning impact program where the children will actually be significantly improved in learning could be over $100 a child. But when you go to national scale, we've projected that out, that could work out at about $3 a child, and that's in maths, literacy, that involves teacher capacity building. We haven't had yet the opportunity to go to national scale in these contexts, but we have had the opportunity to go to the hundreds of thousands. And so through that, we're building, not just with education, I'm talking about the broader ecosystem. We're building knowledge and understanding of what it'll take to scale to a national level. And I think that holds tremendous amounts of promise, because when we can do that at that level, we'll get some real value for money.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm going to say, Dr. Mulambe, how does Kenya see the role of technology in education?
I think you're on mute, Dr. Mulambe.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the area of technology has become very, very important to us. And I want to say that for Kenya, even before COVID, we had, as a nation, did realize the importance of technology. Before COVID, our emphasis was mainly on integration, where we were more keen on ICT supporting the physical teaching, mainly to support us in the areas of teaching and learning and also governance. But I want to also report at this earliest opportunity that the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic has made the importance of technology to education even more and more important. In fact, it has really become a priority. And that now we are also trying to work, just like other nations in the world, to see how technology can also assist us to conduct the teaching, learning, and even governance as a standalone, so that we can be able to be more resilient as we go into the future. Because as soon as the pandemic came, there we were, we had to conduct remote teaching and learning through radios, TVs, internet, and all that. And of course, there were those limitations of connectivity, there was the limitations of the devices and all that. And I think that is something that we have now realized as a nation that we need to really work on to ensure that our area of technology is really improved, so that we have all the blended approaches to technology, so that we can approach the future with a lot of confidence. Of course, from our end, even coming up with an ICT ministry was in itself quite a plus in this direction, because this was to increase the focus and of course the investment in the area of ICT. And of course, it's good to report that we in education work with ICT ministry very closely to do many things. In our case, we have tried to apply technology in our schools, of course, through also support of partners under this program called Digital Literacy Program for primary schools. Maybe what is very popular is the one laptop per child, which we talked about way back. Was it in 2013, 2014? But of course, we have since graduated into ICT laboratories, and that the laptops or the tablets are supposed to be accessible to all the learners. We also have programs in secondary schools, Computer for Schools Kenya, and of course, with many other partners supporting us to provide computers and of course ICT at the level of secondary education. I think that is going on quite well. Our policy and legal documents have put a lot of emphasis on ICT. Our session of paper number 1 of 2019 does state that education shall be transformed to meet the 21st century needs. And that actually means that technology is quite at the center of this. We also have our strategy of 2018-2022, the one we call NESP, National Education Sector Support Program, provides for integration of ICT in education, training and research for management, teaching and learning at all levels. So that again tells you how much we do recognize the importance of ICT in the area of teaching and learning, and that within our strategy, we have actually made sure that we want to enhance the area of ICT integration. ICT has been introduced to our primary schools. I think I said that, DLP and all that. And it's also important to note that for the first time round, we now are almost now having an ICT policy, which now takes into account the use of some of the latest technologies under ICT in the area of teaching and learning, so that going forward, all that we shall be doing under ICT and of course teaching and learning will be captured in a policy. So very soon we are having our ICT policy approved, and I think we have gained quite a lot as a country. The list of the gains is endless, quite a number of gains, but of course, just like it has been said by other partners, we need to really do a lot of capacity building of our teachers. And I want to tell you that that is going on. We are doing a lot of training for our teachers to ensure that our teachers get to understand the use of ICT under the competence-based curriculum, and of course the use of ICT in the use of ICT in abnormal or emergent situations, like when there is a pandemic like COVID. Otherwise, I think it's an area that we have put a lot of emphasis, and of course through partners like IMLANGO, we have also done quite a lot in the selected counties. I think there are 4 or 5 of them. You see very, very important interventions to ensure that technology is there. And it's true that where technology has been used, we have actually seen greater learning outcomes. The learning outcomes have really improved, particularly where technology has been used. It's also important to note that across board, just like my colleague Richard did say, that we have so many large class sizes. You know, you have class sizes of 80, you have class sizes of 100, you have class sizes of 60, and sometimes doing, the physical teaching sometimes becomes an impossibility. And we want to say that with technology now, going deep into things like robotics and all that, we should be able to come out of this problem moving forward. Again, this technology is trying to also remove some of the barriers, because I don't know, I know that there are other educationists on board, but sometimes we say learning outcomes depend on the person of the teacher. You know, sometimes the character of the teacher or the way the teacher is trying to put across information, or the way the teacher is cultured to put across information, sometimes affects learning outcomes and learning impacts. But you see now with technology, we are going to come up with standard ways, right, or standard presentations that will be able to cut across, and some of these weaknesses that could be there by certain human beings will really be taken care of. Otherwise, it's an area that we are working on very much as a country and as a ministry to ensure that we are there. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you very much, Doctor. Debbie, is Debbie there?
I'm here.
Hey, Debbie.
I'm here. How is it?
Through my engagement with Avanti, we've spoken a lot at great length about Avanti's involvement in education and the schools, Avanti and Wiz Education Connect in Kenya. Could you talk to us about the iMango project and the impact technology has had for these children?
Yeah, absolutely, Isaac, thank you. And I know we're very short of time. We've probably run over and we're losing a few people off the participants, but let me try and sort of close with, we've heard a huge amount of challenges today. We know this is not easy. We know what we're facing in Africa now, and nobody more so than the iMango project, the consortium that we were together for 7 years or so, and we're now just ended our 8th year in iMango, and it's been an incredibly successful project. And I just wanted to share a couple of things and say why I think it's successful, and just to kind of hopefully end then on a positive note in that way. So as we said, consortium got together 7 years ago with ourselves, with Wiz Education, with Squid, and with Kamara. So we had maths, we had literature, and we had the hardware delivered, and our content, our bandwidth connectivity. But putting connectivity in any schools anywhere or in any sort of far-reach place, if you don't have the right content and then all of the right wraparound around it, then you're basically just giving them free Facebook, or free anywhere to go and sort of surf the internet. So by pulling together this consortium is what's made it successful. So we've reached over the last, even just the last 4 years alone, we've reached 180,000 students. At least half of those are girls, which is what is part of the girls' education program, but it's been about a sort of 50-50 or so. As Richard alluded to at the start, if we could get every one of those children, by giving them 60 minutes in the ICT lab to get onto adaptive learning, that 60 minutes a week has then resulted in a 18 months improvement in their maths age per year. So that's another 6 months on any of the in countries that our sort of higher income. So that's fabulous in there. But I think one of the things that I'm certainly most proud of, and I've only been involved with the project for the last couple of years or so, but it's having the group of people that's making a difference, like people having like Joyce on the pitch and understanding how we bring the parents with us, the teachers with us, all the communities with us in that way. We've got Kezia on the ground who does the safeguarding and really, really helps us to think about what impact this is having on children on a day-to-day basis as well as their learning. And then as well as the school stuff we've been doing is then bringing into, we have girls clubs. So helping girls with life skills and giving them the confidence and being able to talk amongst themselves and being able to learn from each other. And as Dr. Sylvester said, be able to have mentors and seeing that other women doing really well and how we can do that is absolutely giving them the confidence to say, hang on a minute, this isn't good enough. And I'm going to challenge this, I'm going to do this going forward. So that's amazing. And of course, the thing that we absolutely can't do without is having the evidence, as like David said, it's no good us knowing we're doing a great job when you go there, but you need the evidence to be able to go and work with supporters and funders and that in the future, and having a very close collaboration with the Ministry of Education, with sort of Dr. Malamba to understand, to make sure that our content that we're delivering is aligned with the curriculum in those countries. So we can't change this overnight, but we've had 7 years at this and been able to do something and deliver something that we're incredibly proud of. And it may just be a drop in the ocean when you look at those millions of children across the world without education. But if we could all do more of what we've started for the last 7 years in Imalango, then I think we're going in the right direction.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I've just been blown away by everything I've heard today. And I think that hopefully our listeners would feel enlightened as well, because obviously there are a lot of challenges, but we're, taking steps in the right direction. So thank you all for your input, and hopefully we can hear more in the future. The fact we've gone over is a testament to how much there is to talk about this topic. So today, the Tokyo Olympics begins. So over the 4 weeks, the 2021 Olympics is due to take place, and roughly 132,000 girls will be married off and risk never entering a classroom again.
We'll take 100 Olympic stadiums to fit the number of children out of secondary school in lower income countries.
So for each of the 33 Olympic sports, 1 million children will miss out on the chance to learn to read if we don't act and fund the GPE.
We are calling on world leaders to step up and meet the 5 billion funding pledge for the GPE. This money will address the issues laid out by our panel today.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully we can catch up all again soon.